the street that nobody watched. New York City in the autumn of 1958 was a city that never stopped moving. Cabs blared. Newsboys shouted headlines. Businessmen in fedoras hustled past fruit carts and shoeshine stands with the kind of practiced urgency that made you feel like the whole world was running late for something. The sidewalks of Mulberry Street were no exception. It was one of those narrow, forgotten corridors in lower Manhattan where the old brick buildings leaned toward each other like tired men sharing a secret, where laundry lines crisscrossed overhead like a web of forgotten promises, and where the autumn light hit the pavement in thin golden strips between the shadows. It was not a glamorous street. It was not the kind of place where famous people walked. It was the kind of place where people walked quickly, heads down, coats pulled tight, trying to get somewhere warmer, somewhere brighter, somewhere that wasn't here. The shops along the block were small and unremarkable, a tailor with a cracked window display, a bakery that smelled of yesterday's bread, a corner grocer whose wooden crates of apples sat out on the sidewalk like an afterthought. The foot traffic was steady but thin, the kind of crowd that moved through without really seeing anything. And yet, on this particular Tuesday morning, something was happening on that street that none of those hurrying people quite understood. Something quiet. Something easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Something that, if you had stopped, really stopped, and let it reach you, might have changed the way you saw the world for the rest of your life. It was a sound, a voice, small and raw and trembling, coming from the base of a building near the corner of the block, where the concrete met the brick in a shallow alcove just wide enough for a child to sit. And sitting there, cross-legged on a piece of flattened cardboard, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell, because the grime and the oversized clothing and the way she folded into herself made her look both older and younger at the same time. Older because of the quiet stillness in her body, the kind of stillness that only comes from learning very early that the world is not always kind, and younger because of the smallness of her hands, the softness of her face beneath the dirt, the way her dark hair fell across her forehead in tangled, unwashed curls. She wore a coat that was too big for her, brown and threadbare at the elbows, cinched at the waist with a piece of rope. Her shoes were mismatched, one brown, one black, and both were held together with electrical tape. In her lap sat a guitar. Not a good guitar. A battered, sun-cracked acoustic with a neck that had been glued back on at least once and strings that were not all the same gauge. It looked like something that had been pulled from a dumpster. It probably had been. And her eyes were closed. Not in the way a person closes their eyes when they're concentrating or feeling the music. In the way a person closes their eyes because there's nothing to open them to. A small white cane lay across her knees, folded like a sleeping animal. She was blind, had been since birth. The neighbors on the street said, if you asked them, the ones who had noticed her at all, she'd been there for 3 weeks now, maybe longer, sleeping in the alcove at night, under a piece of cardboard and a blanket someone had left on a park bench 2 blocks away, eating whatever people dropped into a cracked coffee cup beside her, playing her guitar and singing quietly, almost to herself, as if she weren't performing for an audience at all, but simply letting the sound out because it needed somewhere to go. Most people walked right past her. That was the truth of it, and it was a hard truth, but it was the truth. In a city like New York, in a neighborhood like this one, a homeless child on a sidewalk was not unusual enough to stop a stranger in their tracks. It was sad. Yes, people glanced. Some of them felt something twist in their chest. A few of them dropped coins into the cup without breaking stride. But almost no one stopped. Almost no one crouched down. Almost no one asked her name. That morning, the air was cold and sharp, the kind of October cold that gets into your bones if you sit still long enough. And she had been sitting still for a very long time. The girl with no name. Her name was Eleanor, but nobody on that street knew that yet. She had not told anyone, because no one had asked, and she had learned, in the quiet, devastating way that children learn the things that shape them, that offering information about yourself to strangers was rarely rewarded. You kept your head down. You kept your mouth shut. You sang your songs, and you waited, and you hoped that someone, somewhere, might hear you. Eleanor had not always lived on the street. That was important to understand, because it was part of the shape of her story, the the part that made it ache in a way that simple poverty alone could not. She had been born in a small apartment in the Bronx to a mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory and a father who played piano at a jazz bar on weekends and spent the rest of his time fighting a losing war against a bottle of bourbon. They had loved her. That was true, in the way that people love when love and exhaustion and fear are all tangled up together. They had loved her very much. But Eleanor's blindness had been expensive, not in the way that people think of expense, not in the grand, dramatic sense of hospital bills and specialists, in the quieter, more grinding sense. The way it cost her parents time and energy and patience. The way it limited what she could do, where she could go, how fast she could move through a world that was built for people who could see. The way it made everything harder, for everyone, in ways that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. Her father left when she was 6, not cruelly, not out of malice. He simply could not carry the weight of it anymore. The weight of the apartment, the weight of the bills, the weight of watching his daughter navigate a world that was not designed for her. He kissed her forehead one morning and walked out the door and did not come back. Eleanor's mother tried. God, she tried. She worked until her hands bled and her back screamed, and still it was not enough. And then one winter, when Eleanor was 8, her mother got sick, a bad illness, the kind that took weeks off work and weeks off pay and weeks off hope, and the landlord came knocking, and the eviction notice was slipped under the door, and the world that had already been so difficult became, in the space of a single afternoon, impossible. Eleanor's mother placed her with a distant cousin in Manhattan and promised she would come back for her. That had been 4 months ago. The cousin had kept her for 2 weeks before deciding it was too much, too complicated, too much trouble for a blind child with no money and no family close enough to help. She had given Eleanor $20 and pointed her toward the street and said, "I'm sorry, honey," in a voice that did not sound sorry at all. So Eleanor found the alcove, and she found the guitar, left behind in a pile of discarded things behind a church on Canal Street, and she taught herself to play by feel, by sound, by the slow and aching process of running her fingers over the strings until the chords began to make sense. She had always been able to sing, even as a small child, even before everything fell apart. Her voice had been the one thing that came easily, the one gift the world had given her without condition. It was a voice that did not belong on a street corner. It was a voice that belonged in warm rooms, in quiet spaces, in the kind of stillness where people could hear it properly and understand what they were hearing. But no one had heard it properly. Not yet. The song she sang most often was "That's Amore." She had heard it on a radio somewhere, in a shop window, through a wall. She couldn't remember where, and something about it had lodged itself inside her like a seed finding soil. The melody was warm and aching and hopeful all at the same time, and when she sang it, even quietly, even to no one, it filled the cold air of that alcove with something that felt, for a few minutes at a time, like the opposite of loneliness. She sang it that morning, softly at first, her fingers moving over the strings with the careful, tentative touch of someone still learning, then a little louder, as the morning warmed and the foot traffic picked up and the world moved around her like water around a stone. Her voice rose, thin and clear and heartbreakingly sweet, carrying the melody the way a bird carries a song. Not performing it, not selling it, simply releasing it into the air because that was what was for. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's Amore, the people walked past. Most of them didn't hear her. The ones who had felt something flicker in their chests and then kept walking, because that is what people do when the world is loud and cold and there are places to be. A woman in a blue coat slowed for a moment, turned her head, and then hurried on. A man in a delivery uniform tossed a nickel into the cup without looking down. A teenager paused, listened for 3 seconds, and moved on. The song continued. Eleanor's fingers found the next chord. Her voice held the note. The morning pressed on. The Cadillac on Mulberry Street. Dean Martin was not supposed to be on Mulberry Street that morning. He was supposed to be in Midtown at a meeting with a producer about a film project that would eventually go nowhere. His driver had taken a wrong turn somewhere south of Houston, and rather than navigate the one-way maze of downtown Manhattan in a state of rising irritation, Dean had told him to just keep going, to find a way back to the main roads, to take whatever route looked least likely to add another 20 minutes to an already delayed morning. So the car, a dark green 1957 Cadillac, polished and quiet, the kind of car that turned heads even in New York, rolled slowly down Mulberry Street, easing through the narrow traffic, past the bakery and the tailor and the grocer with his crates of apples. Dean was in the back seat, half reading a newspaper, half watching the street go by with the idle, unfocused attention of a man whose mind was somewhere else. He was 31 years old that year, already famous, already one of the most recognizable faces in America, thanks to the movies and the television show and the music that seemed to follow him everywhere like a warm breeze. He wore a charcoal suit and no tie, his collar open in that effortless way that looked careless but was, in fact, very carefully considered. He was relaxed. He was comfortable. He was a man who had every reason in the world to feel good about his life. And then he heard it. It came through the window. Dean had asked the driver to crack it open because he liked the air, liked the smell of the city even when the city smelled like exhaust and garbage and old coffee. It came in small at first, just a thread of sound woven into the general noise of the street. But Dean's ear caught it the way a tuning fork catches a vibration. Something in the melody, something in the voice, something that made him sit up straighter, without quite knowing why. He leaned toward the window, listened. The sound resolved itself into a song he knew very well. In fact, because it was a song or close enough to a song that hearing it in this context, on this street, in this voice, felt like something more than coincidence. It felt like a collision. That's Amore. The voice was small. It was young. It was imperfect in a way that only a child's voice can be imperfect, wavering on the high notes, catching slightly on the breath, finding the melody by instinct rather than training. But underneath all that imperfection, there was something extraordinary, a quality that Dean had spent his entire career listening for in other singers, the thing that separated the good ones from the great ones, the thing that no vocal coach could teach and no amount of practice could manufacture. It was rawness, genuine, unguarded emotion poured directly into sound without filter or pretense. It was the sound of someone singing not because they wanted to be heard, but because they had no other way to say what they were feeling. Dean Martin had been in the entertainment business for over a decade. He had sung thousands of songs. He had heard thousands of voices. And in that moment, sitting in the back of a Cadillac on Forgotten Street in Lower Manhattan, listening to a child sing a song with a broken guitar and a broken heart, he felt something crack open inside his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. "Stop the car," he said. The driver looked in the rear-view mirror. "Mr. Martin, stop the car. Right here. Pull over." The Cadillac eased the curb. Dean opened the door before the driver had fully cut the engine and stepped out onto the sidewalk. And for a moment, he simply stood there, one hand on the roof of the car, listening. The song filled the air around him, thin and fragile and achingly beautiful, and the people on the street continued to move past him, past her, as if neither of them were there. Dean closed the car door quietly. He did not want to startle her. He did not want the sound to stop. He took a few steps toward the alcove, slowly, the way you approach something precious and breakable. And as he got closer, the details of the scene assembled themselves in his mind with clarity that felt almost painful. The cardboard, the mismatched shoes, the rope around the waist of the too big coat, the white cane folded across her knees, the coffee cup with its handful of coins, the guitar with its cracked body and its imperfect strings, the girl herself, small, dirty, impossibly still, her face tilted slightly upward as she sang, as if she were singing to the sky. Dean Martin stood on the sidewalk of Mulberry Street and watched a blind, homeless child sing. That's Amore to no one, and something in him shifted. Not dramatically, not with the kind of sudden, cinematic revelation that makes for a good story, but rarely happens in real life. It was quieter than that. It was a slow, steady settling of a man who has just understood something important about the world. Something it maybe always known but had never quite faced directly. That there were people in this city, in this country, in this life, who were suffering in plain sight, who were invisible, who were singing their hearts out into empty air, and no one was listening. He was listening now. The crouching. Dean Martin crouched down. It was such a simple thing, such a small physical act. A man in an expensive suit bending his knees and lowering himself to the level of a child on a sidewalk. And yet, In the context of that moment, in the context of everything that had led to it and everything that would follow from it. It was one of the most significant things Dean Martin ever did, because crouching down meant something. It meant I see you. It meant you are worth my time. It meant I am going to meet you where you are, not where I am. He crouched down until his face was level with hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the presence of another human being in the small, cold space where she had been sitting alone for weeks. He waited until the song finished. He did not interrupt, did not break the moment. Let her finish the last phrase the way she had intended to finish it. And then he said very quietly, "That was beautiful." The girl's head turned toward him, not with surprise. Exactly, with something more careful than surprise. With the heightened animal awareness of someone who has learned to pay very close attention to sounds. Because sounds are all she has. She tilted her face toward his voice, and even though her eyes were closed, would always be closed in the way that mattered. There was something in her expression that suggested she was seeing him anyway, reading him, measuring the distance between what he said and what he meant. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, careful, the voice of a child who has learned not to expect too much from strangers. "What's your name?" Dean asked. A pause, a hesitation that lasted only a second but carried the weight of weeks of not being asked. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor." Dean repeated it the way he repeated song titles in the studio. Gently, feeling the shape of it, giving it room to breathe. "That's a beautiful name." "Eleanor, I'm Dean." Another pause, shorter this time. "I know who you are," she said, and there was something in her voice, not awe exactly, but a kind of quiet recognition, the way you recognize a voice you've heard on the radio. "I've heard your songs. On the radio in the bakery down the street. They leave the door open sometimes." Dean smiled. He couldn't help it. There was something about the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, so without performance, that made his chest hurt in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "Well," he said, "you sing that song better than I do." She shook her head. "No, I don't." "You do," Dean said, and he meant it, not as flattery, as an observation. "You really do, Eleanor. Where did you learn to play the guitar?" She told him. Not all of it. Not the whole story, not yet, but enough. The guitar behind the church. The weeks of teaching herself by feel. The way the chords had slowly made sense. The way the music had become a kind of language she could speak when no other language seemed to work. Dean listened to all of it without interrupting, without looking at his watch, without any of the subtle signals that adults give when they are waiting for a child to finish talking, so they can get back to their own, more important business. He listened the way he listened in the studio, with his whole body, with his full attention, with the kind of quiet respect that said, "This matters. You matter. Keep going." And somewhere in the middle of her talking, Eleanor's voice began to crack, not from the cold, from something else, from the simple, devastating experience of being listened to by someone who actually wanted to hear what she had to say, from the realization, dawning slowly and then all at once, that this man, this famous, well-dressed, war man crouching on the sidewalk in front of her, was not going to toss a coin in her cup and walk away, was not going to pity her and move on, was going to stay. "Eleanor," Dean said when she had finished, "can I ask you something?" "Okay." "Where's your mom?" The silence that followed was the longest one yet. It stretched out between them like a held breath, and in it, Dean understood everything he needed to understand. He did not press. He did not push. He simply waited. The way you wait for someone to find the words for something that has no easy words. "She's in the Bronx," Eleanor said finally. "She's sick. She couldn't keep me for a while. So I'm here." Dean nodded, even though she couldn't see the nod. "How long have you been here, Eleanor?" "A while," she said, which meant long enough that counting had stopped feeling useful. Dean was quiet for a moment. The street moved around them. The cabs, the pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning in New York. And none of it touched the small, still space where a man and a girl sat together on a piece of cardboard, one of them famous and one of them invisible, and something between them that had no name yet, but was already changing everything. "Eleanor," Dean said, "I'd like to help you. If you'll let me." The phone calls. Dean Martin made 6 phone calls that afternoon. He made them from the lobby of a hotel on Fifth Avenue. Standing in a corner with a cigarette he didn't smoke, his voice low and steady and utterly unhurried, the way it was when he was singing a ballad or talking to someone he genuinely cared about. Each call was different. Each call was precise. Each call was a kind of quiet, purposeful action that the public rarely saw because it happened in private, in the margins of the life that the cameras only captured in its shiniest moments. The first call was to a social worker he knew, a woman named Margaret, who had helped with a charity project years earlier and who had a reputation for being the kind of person who actually followed through on things. Dean explained the situation simply and clearly. A blind girl, 9 years old, homeless on Mulberry Street. A mother somewhere in the Bronx who was sick and needed help finding her way back to her daughter. Margaret said she would handle it. She meant it. The second call was to a doctor, a pediatric specialist upstate, who owed Dean a favor from a fundraiser the previous year. Dean described Eleanor's condition, the blindness, the malnutrition, the weeks on the street, and asked if the doctor would see her privately, no charge, no paperwork that would slow things down. The doctor said yes. The third call was to a woman named Helen, who ran a small but well-funded organization in Manhattan that placed children in foster care. Dean did not want Eleanor in the system. The system was slow, bureaucratic, and often cruel in ways that no one talked about publicly. He wanted something faster, something warmer. He wanted a family, a real one, somewhere in the city that would take in a blind girl and treat her like a daughter. Helen said she knew someone. She would make the call. The fourth and fifth calls were quieter. One to a music teacher at a conservatory on the Upper West Side, a man Dean had known for years who specialized in working with gifted young musicians. Dean described Eleanor's voice, not in the language of a talent scout, but in the language of someone who had genuinely been moved. She has something, he said, the real thing. She just needs someone to teach her what to do with it. The teacher said he would meet her. The sixth call was the one that took the longest. It was to a private investigator, a quiet, discreet man named Arthur, who was very good at finding people who didn't want to be found, or who had simply gotten lost in the machinery of a hard life. Dean gave him the details. A woman in the Bronx, possibly hospitalized, possibly staying with someone, possibly just trying to hold herself together well enough to find her way back to her daughter. Arthur said he would have something within 48 hours. When the last call was done, Dean put the phone down and stood in the hotel lobby for a long moment, his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular. A bellboy passed him with a cart of luggage. A woman in pearls crossed the lobby laughing at something her companion had said. The ordinary world turned around him, bright and indifferent and completely unaware that one of its most famous inhabitants had just spent an afternoon quietly dismantling a tragedy. The girl who sang. Eleanor did not know that afternoon what Dean Martin had done. She did not know about the phone calls, or the doctors, or the social workers, or the music teacher, or the private investigator. She knew only that a man had crouched down on the sidewalk and listened to her sing, and that before he left, he had knelt down and taken her small, cold hand in his warm one and said, "I'm going to come back, Eleanor. And when I do, things are going to be different. Do you trust me?" And she had said yes. Not because she understood what was coming. Not because she had any reason, based on her experience of the world so far, to trust a stranger. She said yes because of the way he said it, because of the warmth in his voice, because of the way he had stayed, for as long as he had stayed, without asking for anything in return, because something in the sound of his words felt like the opposite of everything she had heard in the last 4 months. The rushed goodbyes, the closed doors, the voices that said "I'm sorry" without meaning it. She believed him, and she went back to singing. That evening, as the light faded and the street emptied and the cold crept back into the alcove, Eleanor played her guitar and sang quietly to herself. And the song she chose was "That's Amore," again, because it was a song that brought Dean Martin to her sidewalk. And even though she could not see the future, even though she did not know what shape it was going to take, she knew, in the way that children know things they cannot yet explain, that something had changed, that the song had done something, that the music had reached out into the noise of the world and found someone who was listening, and that this was what music was for. This was what it had always been for. She sang it one more time, softly, her fingers finding the chords in the dark, and the notes drifted up from the alcove and into the autumn air. And for a little while, the street was quiet, and the world stood still, and a blind girl's voice filled the space where loneliness had been. What happened next? Dean Martin came back 2 days later. He came back with Margaret, the social worker, and with a warm coat that was the right size, and with a meal from a restaurant downtown that Eleanor ate slowly, carefully, as if she were afraid it might disappear. He came back with news. Arthur had found her mother. She was in a hospital in the Bronx, recovering from pneumonia, and she had been asking about her daughter every single day since she had been admitted. She had not left Eleanor. She had simply been too sick to come back for her. The reunion happened on a Thursday afternoon in the lobby of the hospital. Dean arranged it quietly, privately, because he understood, the way he understood most things about people, that this was not a moment for an audience. Eleanor's mother walked toward her daughter with the careful, trembling steps of someone who's been afraid for a very long time and is only now beginning to believe that the fear is over. Eleanor heard her coming, heard the footsteps, heard the breath, heard the small, broken sound her mother made when she was close enough to reach, and she turned toward her and opened her arms, and the two of them held each other in the fluorescent light of a hospital lobby, and neither of them let go for a very long time. Dean watched from across the room. He did not intrude. He did not make it about himself. He simply watched, and when it was over, when Eleanor's mother had composed herself enough to look up and see the man standing quietly in the corner, she walked over to him and took his hand and said, in a voice that was still shaking, "How do I thank you for this?" And Dean said what he always said when someone thanked him for something like this. He said, "You don't have to thank me. Just take care of that girl. She's something special." But he did more than that. Over the weeks and months that followed, Dean Martin quietly, persistently, generously made sure that Eleanor and her mother had what they needed. He helped them find an apartment, a real one, with heat and hot water and a door that locked. He helped Eleanor's mother get back on her feet, connected her with work, with support, with the kind of steady, quiet help that doesn't make headlines but changes lives. He arranged for Eleanor to see the specialist upstairs, who confirmed that while her blindness was permanent, there were tools and techniques and resources that could make her world much larger than it had been. And he arranged, as he had promised, for Eleanor to meet the music teacher. That first lesson took place in a small studio on the Upper West Side, a room filled with instruments and sheet music and the warm, particular smell of wood and rosin that music rooms always have. Eleanor sat in a chair with her hands in her lap, and the teacher, a gentle man named Robert, with silver hair and patient eyes, sat across from her and asked her to sing something, anything, whatever she wanted. She sang That's Amore. Robert listened without speaking. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very simply, "Eleanor, you have a gift, a real one, and I would very much like to help you develop it if you'll let me." She let him, and over the months that followed, in that small, warm studio, Eleanor's voice bloomed the way a flower blooms when it finally finds sunlight. Slowly at first, then faster, then with a kind of inevitable, unstoppable force that made everyone who heard understand that they were in the presence of something rare. Robert worked with her every week. He taught her breath control, phrasing, dynamics, the architecture of a song. He taught her how to fill a room with her voice without straining. He taught her how to take the raw, aching emotion that had always been there and shape it into something precise and powerful and unforgettable. Dean checked in, not often and not publicly. He called Robert every few weeks to ask how she was doing. He sent small gifts, a better guitar, eventually a real one, warm tone and responsive, the kind of instrument that amplifies what the player puts into it. He stayed in the background, the way he did with most of the things that mattered most to him, letting the story unfold without needing to be at the center of it. The song that changed everything. Eleanor was 14 when she first performed in public. It was not a grand venue. It was not Carnegie Hall or the Ed Sullivan Stage or any of the places where famous singers made their names. It was a small recital at the conservatory where Robert taught, a quiet evening in a room that held maybe 60 people. Eleanor sat on a simple wooden stool on a simple wooden stage, her white cane leaning against a chair beside her, her hands resting on the neck of her guitar, the good one, the one Dean had given her, and she waited for the room to quiet down. Then she began to sing. The song she chose was not That's Amore. It was something she had written herself in the months before the recital, sitting in the apartment she shared with her mother, her fingers moving over the strings of the dark, finding chords and melodies by feel the way she found everything, by patience, by instinct, by the slow, careful process of listening to what the music wanted to say. The song was about blindness, about what it was like to live in a world you could not see, about finding your way by sound, by touch, by the voices of the people who loved you, about the moment when a stranger's voice on a cold sidewalk said that was beautiful and everything changed. It was, in its way, the most honest song anyone in that room had ever heard. When she finished, there was a silence, the kind of silence that is not empty but full of the sound of 60 people holding their breath, full of the weight of something that has just been said out loud that everyone in the room needed to hear. And then the applause came, and it came hard, and it did not stop for a very long time. Dean Martin was not in the audience that night. He had not been invited, and he would not have come if he had been, because it was not his moment. It was hers. But he heard about it from Robert, who called him the next day, still slightly stunned, and said, "Dean, that girl is going to be extraordinary. I mean it. She's the real thing." And Dean had smiled quietly to himself, the way he smiled when something he'd hoped for turned out to be true, and he had said, "I know, Robert, I know she is." What it meant. The story of Dean Martin and the blind girl on Mulberry Street is not, at its heart, a story about fame. It is not a story about a celebrity doing something generous and public and worthy of admiration, though it was generous, and it was worthy of admiration, and the people who knew about it admired Dean Martin for it for the rest of his life. It is not even really a story about music, though music is a thread that runs through it, the sound that connected a man in a Cadillac to a girl on a sidewalk, the thing that made the invisible visible. It is a story about stopping, about the simple, radical, profoundly difficult act of stopping when the world is moving fast and something small and quiet is happening at the edge of your vision, about noticing, about crouching down, about asking a child her name and listening to the answer like it matters, because it does. It always does. Dean Martin crouched down on a cold sidewalk in October 1958, and in doing so, he changed the life of a girl who had been forgotten by everyone except the music she was making. He did it quietly. He did it without cameras or reporters or any of the machinery that usually accompanies the actions of famous people. He did it because he heard a voice that moved him, and because something in him, something that had nothing to do with fame or success or the careful performance of being Dean Martin, would not let him drive past it. That is the real story. Not the grand gesture, though the gesture was grand. Not the outcome, though the outcome was extraordinary. The real story is the moment itself. The crack of the window, the thread of sound, the turning of the head, the pulling over the car, the crouching down, the moment when one human being saw another human being, truly saw them, and decided that seeing was not enough, that something had to be done, that the music deserved to be heard, and the girl deserved to be found, and the world, for all its noise and speed and indifference, was still a place where one person's attention could change everything. Eleanor grew up to be a singer, a real one, the kind of singer that people remember long after the song is over, the kind whose voice stays in your chest like a note that never quite resolves. She performed in concert halls and on television and on records that people played late at night when they needed to feel something true. And every time she sang, in every performance, in every room, she carried with her the memory of a Tuesday morning in autumn, a man's warm hand on hers, and a voice saying, "I'm going to come back, Eleanor. And when I do, things are going to be different." Things were different. They were very different. And it had all begun with a song and a man who stopped to listen and the quiet, extraordinary power of simply paying attention. August 12, 1958. The morning a famous man heard a little girl singing on a street corner and decided that the world could not afford to look away. The morning that music did what music has always done. It reached across the distance between two human beings and said, "You are not alone. You are not invisible. You are heard. That's Amore."